concerned at the beginning with the distance between what I have to say in English and its translation into Turkish, or the understanding even of my written text in Turkish. So before I begin to read the translations, which make up, I can only read a small part of the paper anyway, I want to make what I hope will be some simpler remarks that our poor translator can catch in more everyday Turkish. And so let me begin with the title. The title here is the Rahmetin, the instruments of divine compassion or love or mercy, between the path and the real. I think it's printed as from the path, or from the Sharia to the Hakikate, but that is exactly the misunderstanding that Ibn Arabi devotes the whole Fütuhat to correcting. That the Sharia is somehow something other. There is the, eliminate the. That the Hakikate is Allah and the world entirely is Sharia, is the path, the divine water of life. And so what stands between Sharia and Hakikate in Ibn Arabi and in reality is walaya. That is the reality of our God's proximity to us and of our veiling and unveiling to the reality of that walaya, that divine guidance through all the ways you'd have to translate walaya as love, guidance, direction, caretaking, compassion. So when you grasp this relation of our life of each soul in Sharia to the reality that underlies it, both as goal but also more importantly as source and context of all our life, then we can really begin to appreciate how everything that happens in life is part of this reality of walaya. And that, for me, when I was writing reading and doing a seminar last fall on the chapters that are the core of this paper, I was stunned, as I always am when I come back to Ibn Arabi, to discover that something not only totally new, but something in this case that really makes sense of all of the Fütuhat. In each fasla, the 6 sections, the 6 fusul of the Fütuhat, Ibn Arabi has 2 chapters which are particularly devoted to Sharia and Hakikate, or 2 sections at least within each fasla. And they become kind of like compasses or lighthouses that help to make sense of this structure of the entire Fütuhat. But so again, before I start reading just a few of these glimmers, these lawaya, these sort of flashes from these particular chapters, I won't get very far anyway in the limited time we have today. I was looking for an image that would convey, when my colleague Dr. Bazuki yesterday was running short in time, you'll notice he started quoting Rumi and Shabistari, because poets can take hundreds of pages of something like the Fütuhat and express it in a single poetic image. Of course, if you really want to understand it, especially in terms of scripture, you have to go back to Ibn Arabi and interpret and contextualize in prose, if you will, in a very mystical prose, what the poets say in very simple images. But so before I go into this role of the Rahmetin, well, let me say one more thing, is Ibn Arabi is not made, and this is very important for those of you who are perhaps encountering Ibn Arabi for the first time, or getting beyond the familiar text of the Fusus to begin to explore the depths of the Fütuhat. You might think, I've been reading and studying this for 30 years with many of the greatest teachers and authorities, and you might think it would get easier. In my experience, it doesn't get easier to read Ibn Arabi, it gets harder. When I was reading it in the seminar, I would have to read it 2 or 3 times before the class. We would go to the class, we'd read it very closely, word by word, trying to translate it just for understanding. And then when you try and have to turn it into English or Turkish, you have to read it 8 or 9 or 10 more times to really begin to understand what he's saying. So when I'm going to read out loud some of these translations for you, they're not meant to be understood as scholarly or conceptual in prose, as you might read a political writer or a journalist or a philosopher. They're meant to evoke the experiences that we all have, and our understanding, this is always a question of spiritual intelligence, of our experience of what Sharia, in that deeper sense of the path of the water of life, really means. And the best way to do that is to read small bits of these translations with other people and discuss, to actually share one's understanding. I just took these translations down to a Sufi group gathering in New York about a month ago, And I read the one story, which is the first one I'm going to read, and we spent 3 hours of some of the most intense sharing and storytelling that I've ever experienced, just with the experiences that were evoked by that one story in Ibn Arabi. So that's, I can't emphasize that too much for those of you who think Ibn Arabi is difficult or whatever. If you don't take it and take it as just as you would any other poetic text and really share the experience and understanding of other people, every person has something to contribute to this process by which we cease to be the blind man and the elephant and actually begin to perceive the elephant. Immediately realized that what this image was about was perceiving that from within this dunya we see these differences. We fail to see what's essential, which is the ruh, the wind that fills all those sails, that is the hakika. Every sail was filled. It didn't matter whether one boat was bigger than another or going this speed or that speed or what direction, but the lesson was about, and of course the way we can actually tell that we're progressing and have some sense of this, we can't see the wind, but we can see the clouds of the difficulties and the trials and the lessons of life. And it's, of course, those are precisely what take us from the Sharia to our awareness of the Hakika. So I hope that that very poetic image of Sheikh Odai Effendi will help you to understand the particular glimpses of this reality of the wind of the spirit that I'm going to turn to right now. There was something else I was going to say by way of introduction, but let me just go ahead. I've shared with the translator now. Also, so for people where my English might be too fast or you might have trouble with English for the Turkish audience, I distributed 25 copies of the translations that I hope made their way among the Turkish people who've come to the crowd, and we're on Roman numeral 2. And almost all of this is translation from Ibn Arabi. In each case, I just give a paragraph of introduction. So we begin these explorations of the Sharia and Hakika with the delightful story from chapter 437 of the Fütuhat, which illustrates and epitomizes the key practical role, at once inspiring, teaching, illuminating, and reproaching, of the human instruments or vessels of divine compassion or divine love, the Rahmetin, at every stage of the path of realization, leading us back to the divine reality. At the same time, quoting this anecdote in its original context should help to suggest the complex but memorably effective rhetorical devices that Ibn Arabi uses throughout his Meccan Illuminations to communicate the actual spiritual realities, and most importantly, each reader's own decisively illuminating direct experiences, which underlie his notoriously complex philosophical and theological formulations of these same metaphysical processes.